Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. I know if you're watching this that you're enjoying the Bumps and Thumps podcast. In order to continue the podcast and get the guests on that everyone wants to hear about, we need support from listeners like you. There are a few ways you can do this. One is going to anchor.fm, which will be on the bottom of your screen here, and click the support button. There you can make a monthly contribution to support the podcast. There's also, we have a Teespring store. We have a link down at the bottom of the screen as well for that. And we have products such as t-shirts like this one I'm wearing, backpacks, glassware, and other great items for you to purchase. Those purchases go directly back into the podcast and get on guests that require financial compensation. Thank you again for your support. Go to those websites and support our podcast, and we will continue to bring the guests that you want to hear about, past and present. And thank you for your support and enjoy the podcast. Thank you for joining another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today has been in wrestling, a part of wrestling, for over 40 years. She is the author of the book titled Brody, The Triumph and Tragedy of Wrestling's Rebel. She is a lifetime member of the Cauliflower Alley Club. She's also the Reunion Registration Registrar for the Cauliflower Alley Club and was the wife of the late Bruiser Brody. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome Mrs. Barbara Goodish. Barbara, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Brian, it's really my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you for talking to me and still remembering a lot of legacies that have left us behind.
Yes, I mean, your late husband had a huge impact on the wrestling business, as well as, the spouses, I think, don't get enough credit for what they have to do behind the scenes with the family, taking care of the children and all that. And when I reached out to you and you accepted the invitation, I was really grateful because I'm trying to get a diverse group of people in here, the spouses, not just the wrestlers and the promoters, but the spouses, the fans. And I really appreciate you coming on here today. So,
well, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And just a note too, working at the Cauliflower Alley Club, I know you guys don't get paid for anything, so that's a huge responsibility for what you all do. And can you talk about a little bit what you do there and how that functions?
I first went there in 2015 when they gave an award to Frank Bruiser. Mm-hmm. And I'd heard about it, but had not had anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. And I went there to accept the award. As I said before, I really hadn't had much. I lost my family. I had lost my family in wrestling, and only a very few people had kept in touch with me. Stan Hansen, of course, was one of them. And of course, I had Darla and Herb Simmons and just a few of the people. But then when they gave the award, when Morgan Dollar, told me that Frank was getting an award, I was at one of the first events I ever went to was in Fort Worth, because I really didn't have anything to do with anything for such a long period of time. And when I went to the Cauliflower Alley Club, it was like I found my family. It was just such a unique family that it was like, what have I been missing for so long? And it is just so nice to have that family. And the Cauliflower Alley Club, what a wonderful, wonderful organization. Because as you know, with wrestlers, there's no 401k and there's no pensions and there's nothing. They give their bodies up and their time and everything and get nothing. And a lot of them, of course, now have injuries because it's such a physical demand on their bodies to give everybody what they, to be who they are. Yeah. And then they leave. And then a lot of them, of course, get into financial difficulties. Mm-hmm. And then, I think you already repeated, you can go back, call the Cauliflower Alley Club, and you can get some help. So it's like, as I said, helping the ex-wrestlers who really need help because there's nowhere else they can really turn to. Yeah. So I went there 2015. It was Stan Hansen and Terry Funk gave me the award for Frank. It was really nice to see both of them. And Stan has always kept in my life ever since it happened.
Yeah.
And then I went back every year. And then finally, as I said, with Brian Blair and everything, and my family, and just they asked me if I would like to help out. And I said, I would love to give back. You've given me, my family, I would love to give back to you. So I just take care of the registration. When they come in to register for the events, they get their ticket and they get their lanyard, and you know, and it's just such a great organization. So anybody out there, it's only, I think, such a small amount per year. I think it's $27 per year to join. You get four magazines in that time. And please come. You will never have such a good time. There's so many great people that it is, as I said, it's a wonderful organization. And I did become a lifetime member because I always like to give back. When people give you something, I like myself. I think it's nice to give back. You receive and you give.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't really know much about it either until I did some research when I started this podcast about almost 2 years ago. And I looked into it and I noticed, you know, you guys do a lot of good things for those wrestlers. As you said, some of them fall on financial hardship. There's no pension, especially for the ones that were, to me, the grinders and the guys that made wrestling what it is today. You know, your husband, Stan Hansen, Terry Funk, those guys paved the way for people that wrestle in those big organizations today. I mean, if it wasn't for them guys, they wouldn't have the financial compensation that they have today. That's a fact. I know that for my heart of hearts.
Right. And as I said, and this is what's so unbelievable. I mean, it is coming up to 34 years since he left us in July.
Yeah.
And when I go to these events, I have all these young people, young fans and young people that are just starting their wrestling careers. They'll come up and they'll tell me things. And it's like, and then I ask them their age. And most of them, they weren't even born when he left us. And this is the power of social media. Because you've got social media, you've got the YouTube, he even has his own Facebook page.
Okay.
So,
wow.
You know, I think what is it called? Bruiser Brody, Wrestling's Last Rebel. And it's really great. I'm sort of the anonymous administrator, because I like to at least keep check of what people is, you know what I mean, what they are, to keep it clean, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You got.
There's a lot of things you don't want to get involved in, or you don't want to, you know, you want a good place.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I see photographs, especially from Japan, and that I see photographs that I've never seen before. So and it is just amazing, like I said, how people remember and how people, and I go back, it has to be YouTube, you know, the YouTube, because if you look at a match from the old days of the old timers, the legends, and you look at the match today, it's such a difference in comparison.
Yeah.
Than what? I mean, you had Abdullah the Butcher, you had the Sheik, you had, you know, characters that were unbelievable in the ring.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Yeah. I can remember when Bruiser Brody was in the AWA under the Sheik, Adnan Casey. That was one of my, and he did his job because I could not stand. I couldn't stand him. He did his job. Him and Nor the Barbarian, just ruthless. They were so big and powerful, and just they played their roles to the T. And you know, I think that's kind of a missing part today. Not to get off track here, but
no, I know
it's you know, it seems so real. You really could not stand those heels, and you really love the faces, you know, and it just seems like, and you know, you really, I mean, those guys I'm not saying guys don't get hurt today, but I'm saying those guys back then were, I think, a little more physical in their, when they were doing their matches. And I'm not saying it's not physical now, because it is. People get hurt. I mean, I get it, but I just think there was more expected of them.
And there was a little bit more red too back in those days. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I call it red and green. It was a little bit red. Red made green.
Yeah, red made green. Yeah.
Red made green.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing. Because I know Frank, I mean, whenever he would come home, he would say, you know, all I want to do is to give the people the best night of their life, because they're paying to come in to see me. And I want them to leave being totally satisfied. And I want them to leave saying, it looks real. It's got to be real.
Yeah.
You know, because the definition between the two, and even when the few matches I've seen, it did look real. Kind of, whoa, this is real. And I have been like in St. Louis, a little town outside St. Louis, they have a Bruiser Brody memorial with Herb Simmons every year on May the 14th.
Okay.
Getting ready to go again this May the 14th. Of course, the last couple of years, because of COVID, we haven't had it.
Yeah.
And I'll be in the dressing room, you know what I mean, the dressing room with the guys, you know, getting everything ready. And I mean, they come. This is kind of like old school wrestling. He still runs, because Frank was with him for such a long time before everything happened too. So Herb is another one who's been a really good friend to me. And I'll be there. I mean, their bodies, they come back in from a match. I mean, they are just bruised and, you know, you can see it all over their bodies, that they are hitting for real, you know.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
You know, it's, and that's why I said a couple of times I've been outside and I've watched them, and it's like, you can hear it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's but he's kind of still going back to the, I mean, he's still the old school after he's been in the promotion now for over 40 years.
Yeah.
So he's still producing old school wrestling.
Well, that's good. That's great. That's wonderful to hear. So if you're listening or watching this will come out here in a few weeks. If you're in the St. Louis area, go to that memorial show.
It's East Condolet.
Okay.
Yeah, East Condolet.
All right. Yeah. So, all right, let's kind of go into a little bit about you. Where did you grow up? Obviously, you have an accent. So and where'd you grow up, and how did you meet Frank?
Grew up in New Zealand.
Okay.
Being very, I mean, you're talking about the 50s. Give my age away, but that's okay. Talking about the 50s. And New Zealand was very, very, I mean, it was a country that is so far removed. A lot of people, even today, I ask them and they still don't know. I think New Zealand became famous with The Hobbit, the movie, The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think about that sometimes. I mean, we didn't even have running water. We had a cistern on top of the roof, and hopefully it rained so we could get water.
Wow.
No washing machines, everything, not even a stove back in those days. Not even a refrigerator. You had someone came around with ice and put it in a little container outside the house so you could keep things cool. And I always used to watch. There's a series, I don't know if you know, Three Stooges. There's an episode of the Three Stooges that has the ice pick, the man going up the stairs, and that always reminds me of my home, because I could always remember coming in with the ice, this big block of ice, and putting it in. So grew up, when you think about it, grew up very, very simple. Didn't have TV till I think I was 15 to see the first TV. Okay. So, but I think back today, and I think that maybe it was a wonderful way to grow up, because you grew up without social media, you grew up without TV, you played outside, you read books. The big event was going to the movies on a Saturday afternoon, the matinee, and seeing film from America and film from all around the world, black and white, of course, and thinking, oh, wow, look at these places. And here we are in this little tiny remote country. Yeah. So as soon as I became old enough, I realized, me and my girlfriend, we wanted to go to Australia. So as soon as I was old enough, I think I was only 18, we decided, okay, it's time to get out in this big wide world that we've been watching. And because, you know, you hear about them because you didn't know much about it. And my mum never learned to drive until she was 50. So when I was a teenager, I would go out with her driving and would pick up hitchhikers. Sounds strange now.
Yeah.
But but this was a safe time. Yeah. And I remember we'd pick up hitchhikers and take them, and they were from all over the world. And I can remember sitting there and they would tell us stories. A lot of them from German and everywhere, you know, and it was like listening to these stories. And I think that's kind of why I got my travel bug. It was like, wow, sitting there listening to all these fantastic things. And so as soon as I got old enough, being 18, 19, I think I was, me and my girlfriend, we took off over to Sydney and started off our life over there. And then I ended up just doing regular work, you know, office work, secretary, everything, worked a little bit of everything. Nightclubs as a second hand, you know, second job, worked all the time. And then finally it was like, okay, I think working in a hotel would be very interesting, you know, because, you know, you're in an office and that is, you know, you don't meet a lot of people. It's an office, you know, 9 to 5. And I thought, well, yeah. So I thought, I saw a job. So I went to the job. I didn't have any knowledge about hotels. I didn't have any knowledge about the equipment. I didn't have anything. So I thought, okay, what can I do? So I found out what kind of machines they use. This is, of course, before internet, before computers, before anything. So what happened was I went to the manufacturer of where they sold these machines, and I told them, oh yeah, I'm coming to investigate some machines. We're opening up a motel and we need some, you know, we need some merchandise to put in the motel. They went through all the machines for me. So by the time I went back for another interview, I had so much knowledge. I got the job.
That's great.
Oh yeah, do you use this machine or this machine? And I didn't have a clue because I'd never used one before except for what they showed me. You know, so it was like, okay. So I got the job, and that was the start. And then I ended up working in a little place, the Texas Tavern in Australia. This was in Sydney now. I'm in Sydney. And it just happened to be a place where all the boys, all the wrestlers who had their tour of New Zealand and Australia would stay. So got to meet them because, as I said, a few times I worked down on the front desk. So to me, I was like a big sister because I'd give them their mail. And this was before they wrote letters because it was too expensive to make phone calls from Australia to America back in those days. Yeah. So I would give them their mail. They'd show me photographs of their kids and their wives. And it was a lonely existence back in those days. When they left, that was it. Like now, we're all around the world. You know, you push a button and you talk to somebody in another country. So the communication is so different. Whereas back in those days, you wrote letters. It's hard to think about that now. That you wrote a letter. That was your, form of communication. Yeah. And so this day, Frank had come in. I was friends with a lot of them. It just so happened that he'd been there, just talking, and had been there for quite some time. And this one night, somebody didn't show up for the late shift. So they asked me, well, can you work the late shift? Oh, sure. What else am I going to do? So I happened to be there getting off work at 11 o'clock at night. And the boys all just pulled up in a cab. I mean, when I talk about, I had Andre the Giant, I had Don Morocco, I had, you name it, JJ Dillon, It's funny, JJ Dillon is also a friend today too, which I've known for 40 plus years. Yeah. It's funny, I caught up with quite a few of the old timers that I met, young timers that I met, in Australia. So this night they're all saying, and I had one that was a really good friend, and he said, look, we're going up. My boss was an American gentleman, and he had another club up the street, which was called the Bourbon and Beef. So they said, look, it's late. Why don't you just come up and have a drink with us? okay, sure. This is when you work at night, it's like getting off at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
It's not something. It's the time is irrelevant. So I went up the street. Everybody was there. There was like 12 of us. There was midgets and giants, and quite a show, really. But to me, they're just people I've always had. People are just people. It doesn't matter. It's how they treat you, and it doesn't matter who they are, what they are, what nationality. They're all the same. It's how you treat each other. And and all of a sudden, we're sitting at this table. All these people, one by one, they start leaving. Okay, we'll be back. And the finish, there was just 3 of us. There was Carl Krupp, who's also passed on. There was me, and there was Frank. Then Carl gets up and leaves and said, I'll be right back. No, I found out later it was a work. He didn't know how to get me by myself. So he'd set all the boys up. So yeah, you've got to leave, but don't do it so she knows. So that is how we met. And then just very slowly, he was there for probably 6 months, 7 months. He was doing Australia. He'd gone home for Christmas, came back. And then one night he came back and he said, I'm off to the States in the morning. Oh, it had, Frank has kind of had a little reputation about standing up. Ever thought some, not to get into it, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I got you.
There's quite, he has there's some stories. And he came back and he said, okay, well, nice knowing you. So what he did, he put Frank, as you probably know, was very stingy. He saved his money. He ate, when he went on the road, it was green beans and tuna in his, so he wouldn't have to spend money going out. He had, had those green beans and tuna in his bag. So he always had food with him. So he knew there was life after wrestling. So he knew to save, you know what I mean? He was a businessman. I guess you'd say a businessman. And he treated wrestling like a business. He never lost sight of who he was. Yeah. He was always Frank Goodish. Then he became Bruiser Brody. And then he would come back to Frank Goodish again. So some people, as we know in life, doesn't matter what it is, will lose sight of who they really are.
Yes.
So they become who they create.
Yes.
But, so what happened? I said, and what he did was he put a pile of money down on the table, his last pay, it was all in cash, put it down on the table. And he said, he didn't say anything except, I'd like you to come over. There was no promises. There was no none of that, no major promises. He said, I'll just make sure I'll look after you, but just come over. That was it. It wasn't like it's going to be,
Yeah.
So he left the next day and I came over a couple of weeks later. Of course, I'd been over in Australia for quite some time. So there was a lot of business I had to tie up.
Yeah.
So I came over very scared. I'm in here, coming over to America, got my visa and everything. This was before 9/11. So when I got out of the plane, I always remember my first vision of America was leaving the plane and the Hare Krishnas were right at the gate. And, they would come up and they would be doing their chanting. And I remember coming out there and here's the Hare Krishnas right there as I'm walking out the gate. And I said, well, this is a pretty cool place. This is different. So got on the plane, went to San Antonio. Of course, you're thinking, are they going to be there? That thought goes in, what am I doing? Well, I'll get to see America anyway. And I had a ticket into America. Then I had a ticket onto London. You always got to have a plan A and plan B in life, because plan A doesn't work out. You want to have a plan B.
Yeah.
Just in case. Sometimes a plan C too.
Yeah.
So my plan B was, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll just go. I'd always wanted to go to England, London. So I thought, well, I'll get a ticket on to London. just in case, have my plan B.
Yeah, that's right.
But I guess not. I'm still here. So
Yeah.
I guess plan B never came into fruition. But that's kind of how it just all started. And as I said, with everything happening, we're in San Antonio, where he, where he worked out of right up until the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you, when he got going, when he went to Minnesota or went to Georgia, did you travel with him, or did you stay home and take care of the family?
Near enough stayed home. He traveled. I went to a couple of, because people ask me, how about, because some of them travel all over the place and go with the to the matches, but I would sometimes travel with him in Texas. If he was driving, if it's close, like Corpus Christi or somewhere that was in one of these small towns in Texas, there's only a couple of hours driving, then I would drive with him. But that was about all. Okay. I think the only real time I really went with him, and people will still talk about this match, I guess I saw one of the best matches that he's, that people remember, was when he did 1 hour with Ric Flair in St. Louis.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I know a lot of people still talk, because I didn't think that he could, both of them, that he could go 1 hour with Rick, because Rick's, that was a match. Yeah. And what it was the Japanese. The Japanese were in town. Giant Baba was in town, and Mrs. Baba, and they were over at that match because they filmed it too for the Japanese people. Okay. So I got to go, and he had family. He had family in, his sister was living in St. Louis at the time. So I actually got to go to St. Louis to see that match. And I did. One other match was the, which one was the big one? The Superdome in New Orleans. Was that New Orleans?
Oh, the world class. Yeah.
Yeah. I did one time with that. I did go down. It was kind of like a little vacation that I went to. It was after Jeff had been born, and got away for a couple of days. Yeah. So that's pretty much the only, of course, he would bring home tapes from Japan. Yeah. And as I'm going through the house, I'd see that, because as you know, Japan is a totally different wrestling organization than what it is over here in the States. Because they put you to work over there. And he was lucky to be a big man like Stan and a few of the other ones that could actually work to their style and do the things. Frank had always, he could always, I see some of the photographs, I've never been able to kick my leg that high.
Yeah.
When he gave that big boot.
The big boot, yeah.
Big boot.
Yeah.
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 It's like, how the hell did he get his leg up that high?
Yeah. Wanted to ask you, he worked in quite a few territories. What do you think, or believe, I guess I should say, was his favorite area? I'm going to assume Texas, but I didn't know if there was another area that he particularly liked to work in.
Texas with Fritz, and the St. Louis area with Sam Muchnick. Okay. Those were the two, and that's where he met Larry, and that's where he met Herb. So I would have to say, definitely St. Louis, because they treated him so good. In fact, when his son was born, he was working Kansas City that night, and he was on his way to St. Louis. So he didn't even know that when he got to St. Louis, he had the telephone message that his son had been born. He went to work that night. Sam told him, "You leave, get a plane, and go home." Yeah. Didn't even have to work. That's how great Sam.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, Sam was. So he made it home that night. I think it was like about 10 o'clock. He made it. Then he had to leave again. Of course, he stayed one day, and then, had to leave again for work the following, I think 2 days or something. So, so that's why I said, that is class. Didn't worry about the match. Didn't worry about anything. Worried about that. You get home and meet your son.
That's right. That's good. I know back then a lot of the promoters family was not a priority.
Mm-mm.
You worked, so a lot of respect. And I've heard a lot of good things about Sam and Fritz, both.
Mm-hmm.
So, um,
Yeah, because he
go
was
ahead.
kind of part of the family. I mean, Fritz
Yeah.
was the one that kind of got him into the business, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he worked. They were kind of like brothers. They thought of Frank as a big brother, and I mean, you talk about tragedy. Now that family was was tragedy.
Yeah.
It was just because he was in Japan, of course, with David, and I think I'd gone to New Zealand. If I remember, I was in New Zealand, and he called me that just after it, it all happened. And I mean, I know it was just, and then the whole thing was just sad. I mean, and he was there for just about all of them except for Carrie, but I have to say, my Kevin, with being in Hawaii, with having his family and his kids there and everything, his sons now are wrestling and everything, the last of the Von Erichs.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a tragedy of what happened to that family. And, it's, I don't have words for it. It's just, it's quite disheartening. And so let's talk about when Frank was gone, which was probably pretty frequent. What was life like for you? I mean,
when you really come down to it, I keep thinking, I mean, we were probably lucky to be together 3 months of a whole year, counting the times that, the few times that he was home, especially when he got into the Japanese, because now that was like a 4-week, 6-week trip that he was gone. Sometimes I wouldn't hear from him because, like I said, don't waste money on a telephone call. They're expensive from Japan.
Yeah.
So I kind of was left to, you know what I mean? And I think he'd often said to me, he said, I had to travel around the world to find someone that would put up with my lifestyle. So,
very true.
There's a lot of people they're not going to tolerate, because I'm not going to be there. I can't, I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard, but I know that you can do it. And I did. Yeah. So it was hard, especially after Jeff came and not having his father around and everything. But when his father was home, he would do everything he possible could. If he was in Little League, was in baseball, he'd come to the baseball field and watch him. If they had a show and tell at school, Jeff would take his dad as show and tell. The teachers loved it.
I bet they did.
And here he is trying to sit in one of these little tiny chairs in this classroom. So after everything happened, they were really kind. They put Jeff with one of his best friends for that year and that. So they just the teachers, they just loved him there, because they knew that he's a father that's gone all the time, but he's trying to do the best he can when he comes home.
Yeah, I can imagine being as big as he was and sitting in those little chairs.
So he tried, as I said. And it's tough when the father, the husband, is on the road all the time, but it's just something you adjust to. It's just something, you work at.
It'd be tough. And I want to talk a little bit, if I could, after what happened to your husband. I know it took time to adjust. I guess, how did you cope with that, and how did you move? I don't want to say move on, but kind of just get back into life with your family and your son. I mean, I'm sure that was very excruciating and painful and challenging.
Well, first thing, when I came back to the States after being, I went to Puerto Rico and stayed there and there was things that had to be done over there that I couldn't do if I got back to the States. My hands would have been tied. So there was certain things that I had to do over there before coming back to the States, certificates and things like that. And when I came back, one of his best friends, they had 2 kids, little but Not much. One was, I think, the same age as Jeff, and one was a little bit older. And they asked me, they said, this was just after I got back. I said, well, what can we do? I said, leave your kids with me. Just leave your kids with me.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have to go back to work and that, but it was the school holidays because it was July. Yeah. So they left the 2 kids with me. So I came back, and then I had 3 kids I had to kind of take care of, which was good for the mind. Keep the mind busy, because if the mind starts dwelling, that's when things happen. That's when people get into that really bad funk that people get into. So with having 3 kids, and it was good for Jeff too, having 2 kids and not just having mum who's very, very sad. This way, they kept each other going out, taking them out to different things and that. So that was the first thing, was to get through. The next thing was make a list of everything that needs to be done on a piece of paper. If you get one thing off that list, you have accomplished something for that day. You're not gonna, just one thing and that. And then by that, you'll get everything that needs to be done. You'll get it done without worrying about it, but giving you some direction. And I think that was the main thing, was just, and it's not easy. I'm not saying it was easy or anything like that, but just trying to keep that mind focused and not dwell. Of course, the night times were hard and things like that, when the house is quiet and things like that, you think, because all of a sudden you've been going on this path and the path is great. Then all of a sudden you hit a wall and life will never, ever be the same that it was. You have to totally change. You can either go forward or you can go back, or you can just stay. I mean, I know people that have never recovered from a tragedy that's happened, and they've lost out on so much of life. You know, it's hard, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. Yeah. There's no time frame. Yeah. It took me to get rid of all his things that were in. I wish I still had them today, because I didn't realize they would be so valuable. Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had, because now things, just anything is worth a lot of money of his. Yeah. And it was like, but up until the time that I was leaving Texas to come to Florida, I still had his things. He had his own dressing room. So I kind of never even went in there. It was kind of like, that was it. Right up to that time. And it didn't bother me. You know what I mean? I guess it was kind of like, I don't know. I think everybody has their own time of, moving that type of stuff. The mind and possessions are a whole different thing. So until I came here, where I had to make a decision, I wished I'd bought everything with me, but that's another thing. Yeah. But so, and I know, because what happened when my mum died with my dad, my sister and friends went in to the house and took all my mum's things away. He came home from being out and there was nothing of my mum's, which is not, I don't think is the right thing, because he hadn't quite said goodbye. It still made him feel good to have a couple of her things around. And then he comes home and everything is gone. There's nothing. It's like she never existed. And I think you've got to let people do it themselves. Yeah. People think they're helping. Don't get me wrong. People think they're helping, and bless them for that. But sometimes it's not. Everyone is different. Some people it's fine. Everybody is different. But let the person that's lost somebody, let them be the one to decide. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. It's hard. People try and do the right thing for you, and sometimes they end up.
Yeah, and they're only trying to help.
Yeah, exactly. They're not doing it maliciously. Yeah. No.
They're not doing it for anything except trying to help. Right. And that's and I did notice another thing, like if you lose somebody sometimes, especially with Frank, the way it happened and everything, was people would see me and I think they don't know what to say sometimes. So I'd seen them, like, go to the grocery store and you'd see them out of the corner of your eye. They saw you. Yeah. Then they didn't come and say hello or anything because they didn't know what to say. Just as I said, tell people, just go up and say, you know, as if you know them. Well, you know, hello, you know, whatever you want to say, but say something. It's not gonna, you know what I mean, instead of disappearing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I
And
think people don't know what to say, and they're kind of
not
scared to
knowing what
say
to
something.
say.
Yeah, they're scared to say something that
might hurt
upset you.
you,
Yeah.
might, you know, but that's part of the losing process.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Okay. Well, appreciate that insight. Let's talk about the book you wrote a few years back. Great.
Yeah, I got it.
There it is. Yeah.
Look,
if you're watching, there it is. There it is.
Yeah. The Triumph and Tragedy of Wrestling's Rebel. I got a lot of copies. If they want to contact me, they can contact me through Facebook or anything like that.
I will put it down at the bottom of the description, your Facebook page, and I'll probably gonna order one myself just because.
Well, what I'll do, you're doing the send me your address and I'll send you one.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay.
You know,
so let's talk about the book a little bit.
Well, the book came about that another person had contacted me to write a book. I think it was Emerson Murray, who has another book out on Frank. Shouldn't really give him a plug, but you know, hey, that's okay. It's a different book because it was written in a whole different perspective. And some of it in there that I've heard from the family is not quite, you know what I mean? There's a little bit. The book that when Larry approached me, Larry Matisak, when he approached me, it was like a whole different thing because Larry is he was one of the most honest people that I know. And to Frank, he was one of his closest friends. And you have to be to be a friend of Frank, you have to be pretty blatantly honest. And Larry and Herb, like I said, I know I've mentioned them a couple of times. I can't say enough about those two. Larry, of course, unfortunately, has already left us. And when he approached me, he said, look, he said, I've been approached. He'd already done a book with ECW Press up in Canada. And he said, I've been approached. How would you feel? I said, well, I can't write. When he told me, he said, no. He said, all you have to do, I'm going to be doing the wrestling side of it because it's from both perspectives. It's from the wrestling side. He did the wrestling side. And he said, all we want to do, just like you're doing now, talk about exactly like this podcast is what the book is kind of like. It's kind of the same thing. Just write. Because if you write honest or if you talk honest, you don't have to worry because it's honest. You don't have to think about, well, what did I tell this person? Or did I tell this person? You know what I'm talking about. Different things that, you know, we all come sometimes embellish just a little bit. But if you just talk from the heart, from the honest part, you can't make a mistake. So I just did exactly the same. Like you're asking me that. I just wrote it from my perspective. Instead of talking, I just wrote it down. And then he just clarified it. He said, I really didn't have to do much because you're just speaking from the heart. So it's very easy to just, you know, there wasn't really anything I had to correct because that was it. So that was how the book came about, was with Larry. And as I said, I've got, in fact, I'm going to take him. There's a wrestling show here in Daytona Beach. There's a wrestling show. It's like a wrestling con thing in Daytona Beach on the 24th. And then there's the big one up in New Jersey. I think it's the Men in Sports Center. There's a huge one that I'm going to go up to too. They're also giving Frank an award. Oh, wow. Up great. There. So this is what I mean. And then there's Waterloo. I go to Waterloo.
National Wrestling Hall of Fame.
That is correct. Up there in Waterloo, Iowa. We'll be there in July. And then, of course, the CAC in Vegas in September. Back to the CAC.
So you're pretty busy.
This is what I mean. I always remember what Frank said, if you ever, you know, it wasn't a promise of anything, but I'll make sure you're okay. And still today, he's making sure I'm okay. You know, this long afterwards. And like I said, it just amazes me that all these people, when I go to all these events, that they remember. I mean, They just know all about him.
You can't, how can I say this? You can't forget somebody that made such a huge impact, even during the era where the territories, so you didn't have cable back then. I mean, it just started, but I mean, Bruiser Brody was everywhere. Japan, for most notably in Japan, obviously, with Stan Hansen and Terry Funk. They're legends over there. They're legends here as well. But I'm saying, you talk about Bruiser Brody, they're going to know who he is, or who, he was that much of an impact on the business. And
I know. And I get a lot of Japanese friend requests too from Japan that, I have to push the translation button to find out what they're saying. I love that they have a translation button.
That's nice. Yeah.
Facebook that you can find out.
Yeah.
And I can tell, as I said, if there's a birthday or anything, I'll always wish them happy birthday. And it's like, oh, Barbara-san, because they say that S-A-N at the end of your name in the Japanese with respect. And it's like, thank you so much. Well, I appreciate, because Japan they treated him so good. And I was so fortunate when everything happened that Giant Baba and Mrs. Baba, they took me over there for his memorial service.
Wow.
Me and Jeff over there. And I got to see, because he always used to tell me, he said, you just won't understand what it's like over in Japan. Well, thanks to them, thanks to the Japanese company, I got to know exactly what it was like. And Stan was over there too on the trip. So he kind of looked after us and,
That's
everything.
Really nice.
So it was a very big experience. And then of course, Jimmy Snooker, who was another one that Frank worked with him, a lot. And another one that was, he thought a lot of. He had some good matches with Jimmy.
Yeah.
I know you talk about a lot of people now, and it's at this age, especially some of the legends, there's so many that are not here anymore.
It's too bad. I think a lot of it, and this is pure speculation, is just they banged their bodies around so much and gave so much to the business that it took a lot of those guys early in life. And it's too bad, because all these wrestling conventions they have, and when they get invited to the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, it's too bad that they're not around. And
I know
to see it, it's a tragedy.
I think a lot of the old ones, the legends, they'll always be remembered, just like Frank. I mean, to not be here for 34 years this July. And I said, it amazes me. And like I said before, he just wanted to give the fans the best night of his life. And now there's a whole new generation of fans that have picked up on what he was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Legend. And again, like I said earlier, I don't think the spouses get enough credit for what they have to sacrifice at home with because they're raising the children and keeping the house in order. And I want to thank you again, Miss Barbara Goodish. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm going to say a shout out for you, Darla.
Yeah,
told me to tell you hello, and so did Greg Oliver.
Greg, it's good to be seeing him too. As I said, I found my family. I said, with the CAC and everything that first year, I found my family, and it's such a great family too, that it makes you feel good to have these wonderful people in your life.
It is, yes. So they think very highly of you when I talk to them. And folks, I want to say again, Miss Barbara Goodish, if you want a copy of that book, I will have the link of her Facebook page down in the description. Please grab a book from her. I know it's great. I've read the reviews on it. It's a wonderful book. And get out there and see her. She's going to be in Waterloo in July, St. Louis here in about 3 weeks. And get out and say hello to her. She's a heck of a nice lady. From just interacting with her right now, I'm only, and great lady. So Barbara, thank you again so much for coming on here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And as I said, everybody out there, thank you for still remembering him. It's a real honor from the family to all of you.
All right. Again, one more time, Ms. Barbara Goodish, thank you for watching. If you're listening, thank you, and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.